There are certain objects that carry the weight of a human soul. They are not merely composed of precious metals or faceted stones. They are living repositories of memory, carrying the echoes of laughter, the warmth of a touch, and the devastating, hollow ache of profound grief. For me, that object was the Midnight Emerald. It was a Victorian-era pendant, a breathtakingly intricate heirloom that had been passed down through my mother's family for 4 generations. The centerpiece was a flawless, deep green Colombian emerald, weighing nearly 6 carats, encircled by a delicate, lace-like filigree of platinum and vintage rose-cut diamonds. Its appraised financial value was staggering, somewhere in the neighborhood of $90,000, but to me, its monetary worth was entirely, absolutely irrelevant. Its true value was the memory of my mother, Eleanor, wearing it every Christmas Eve. It was the memory of sitting on her lap as a little girl, tracing the cold, smooth facets of the emerald while she read me stories. It was the physical embodiment of the woman who had been my entire world. When my mother was diagnosed with aggressive, late-stage breast cancer, our world shattered. She fought with a quiet, dignified ferocity for 2 years, but the disease was relentless. A week before she passed away, she asked me to bring her the small, velvet-lined mahogany box from her dresser. "This is for you, Clara," my mother had whispered, her voice frail, placing the heavy box into my trembling hands. "Your brother will inherit the estate and the investments, but I want you to have the emerald. It belongs with the women of this family. Keep it safe. Let it remind you that I am always with you." When she died, a part of me died with her. I was 28 years old, working long, grueling hours as a pediatric occupational therapist, living in a modest apartment in the city. The pendant became my most guarded, sacred possession. I didn't dare wear it. I was terrified of losing it or damaging the antique clasp. Instead, I kept it locked in its mahogany box, hidden in the back of my closet, pulling it out only on the days when the grief felt too heavy to carry. 8 months after my mother's funeral, disaster struck my apartment building. A catastrophic structural failure in the roof during a massive winter storm caused severe water damage to the top 3 floors. My apartment was utterly destroyed by black mold and standing water. I was given 24 hours to evacuate while the management company gutted the building. I was frantic, trying to pack up my entire life into cardboard boxes while essentially homeless. That was when my older brother, Owen, stepped in. "You're staying with us, Clara," Owen had insisted over the phone, his voice brokering no argument. "We have the massive guest house over the garage. It's fully furnished. You can stay there rent-free, as long as it takes for your building to be repaired. Bring your valuables. Leave the heavy stuff to the insurance adjusters." I was overwhelmingly grateful. Owen was a partner at a high-powered corporate law firm, a fiercely protective older brother who had been my rock since we lost our mom. But staying at his sprawling, gated suburban estate meant living in the direct orbit of his wife, my sister-in-law, Isabella. Owen and Isabella had been married for 4 years, and our relationship was a masterclass in polite, simmering hostility. Isabella was 29, a woman who treated her life as a relentless, competitive sport. She was a self-proclaimed lifestyle and wellness consultant, which essentially meant she spent her days curating a flawless, hyper-expensive aesthetic for her modest social media following. Her entire existence revolved around status symbols, limited edition Birkin bags, exclusive country club memberships, and exotic vacations she demanded Owen pay for. She viewed my modest, working-class lifestyle with a mixture of sheer amusement and aristocratic disdain. More importantly, she harbored a deep, visceral jealousy over the Midnight Emerald. "It's honestly absurd that Eleanor left that piece to you, Clara," Isabella had scoffed at the estate reading, eyeing the mahogany box like a starved predator. "You wear scrubs to work. You never attend galas or charity balls. It's a museum piece. As Owen's wife, I am the face of the family now. It would look incredible on me for the winter solstice charity auction." I had ignored her, pulling the box tightly against my chest. When I moved into their guest house, I brought the pendant with me. Owen, knowing how profoundly paranoid I was about keeping it safe during my chaotic transition, offered a solution that seemed foolproof. "Put it in my floor safe, Clara. Owen told me on my first night, leading me into his heavy, oak-paneled home office. Hidden beneath a Persian rug was a massive, commercial-grade steel floor safe bolted directly into the foundation. It's fireproof to 2,000 degrees, waterproof, and weighs 800 pounds. I'll put it right next to my legal documents. Nobody can get into this without the master combination. I watched him place the velvet-lined mahogany box carefully into the dark steel vault. I heard the heavy, resounding clank of the deadbolts engaging as he spun the heavy dial. For the first time since my ceiling collapsed, I took a full, deep breath. The last piece of my mother was secure. I lived in their guest house for nearly 3 months. It was an incredibly stressful period. While I had my own space, I still had to share the main house's kitchen and laundry, which meant navigating Isabella's daily toxic drama. During my stay, I noticed a severe, rapidly escalating tension between Isabella and my brother. Owen looked exhausted, burdened by the immense pressure of his firm and the even heavier pressure of financing his wife's bottomless vanity. Isabella was desperately trying to secure an invitation to join the Oakhaven Club, an ultra-exclusive, obscenely expensive country club in their zip code. She was actively competing with a circle of incredibly wealthy, idle wives, and her spending had spiraled completely out of control. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday night. I was in the kitchen making a cup of tea when a screaming match erupted in the master suite. "I cannot pull up to the Oakhaven Gala in a 3-year-old Lexus, Owen. It's humiliating," Isabella shrieked, her voice echoing down the grand staircase. "Sarah just bought the new Range Rover autobiography. I look like the hired help compared to them. I need the car, Owen. It's an investment in my social standing. We don't have $140,000 for a car, Isabella." Owen roared back, the exhaustion evident in his cracking voice. "The market took a hit. I just had to cover the massive tax penalty because you liquidated 50 grand from our joint savings to buy designer clothes in Paris. I'm cutting off the platinum card. We are done bleeding cash for your ego." A heavy thud, the sound of something expensive being thrown against a wall, followed his words. Then, the bedroom door slammed open. Isabella stormed down the stairs, her face flushed with fury, completely ignoring me as she grabbed her keys and sped away into the night. A week later, the repairs on my apartment were finally completed. I was overjoyed. I spent the entire weekend moving my boxes back into my newly renovated, mold-free sanctuary in the city. On Sunday evening, I drove back to Owen's estate to return the guest house keys and collect the last of my belongings. Owen was in the kitchen, nursing a glass of scotch, looking utterly defeated. Isabella was nowhere to be seen, supposedly at a spa retreat to recover from the stress of their argument. "I'm going to miss having you around, Clara," Owen smiled weakly, pulling me into a tight hug. "Sorry it hasn't been the most peaceful environment lately." "It's okay, Owen. I'm just grateful you took me in," I said, squeezing him back. "Before I hit the road, can we open the safe? I need to get Mom's pendant." Owen nodded. "Of course. Let's go." We walked into his dimly lit home office. He rolled back the heavy Persian rug, knelt down on the hardwood floor, and quickly spun the dial of the heavy steel safe. Click. He pulled the heavy metal lid open. He reached inside, moving a stack of manila folders out of the way. He stopped. I watched his shoulders go completely rigid. The silence in the office suddenly felt thick, heavy, and incredibly dangerous. "Owen?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. "What is it?" Owen slowly stood up. His face was the color of old parchment. He was holding the velvet-lined mahogany box, but the delicate brass latch was open, and the box was completely empty. "Clara," Owen choked out, his voice a broken, hollow rasp. He stared at the empty velvet indentation where the emerald should have been. "Clara, it's gone." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath my feet. The room spun violently. I grabbed the edge of his desk to keep myself from collapsing. "Gone?" I screamed, the word ripping out of my throat like a physical wound. "What do you mean, gone? You said it was a commercial vault. You said it was impossible to crack." "It is," Owen yelled, dropping to his knees, frantically tearing through the contents of the safe, throwing stacks of cash, legal deeds, and expensive watches onto the floor in a desperate, panicked frenzy. "There are no signs of a break-in. The lock wasn't forced. Nothing else is missing. The cash is all here. Just the pendant is gone. Did you leave the safe open? I sobbed, collapsing onto the floor beside him, staring at the empty box as if staring hard enough would make the necklace magically reappear. Never! I lock it every single time, Owen swore, his hands shaking violently. Who else has the code? I demanded, the sheer primal panic overriding everything else. Did you give it to anyone? Nobody, Owen insisted, wiping a tear of frustration from his eye. It's a 12-digit code. It's entirely randomized. I memorized it. I didn't even write it down anywhere. He froze. The frantic movement of his hands stopped. He stared at the wall, his brow furrowing as a terrifying dark realization washed over his features. Except, Owen whispered. Except what? I demanded, grabbing his arm. Except I have a master override key, Owen admitted, his voice dropping to a terrified hush. For emergencies. I keep it locked in a false bottom drawer in my bedside table. The implication hung in the heavy, quiet air of the office. Owen, I said, the cold, devastating truth settling heavily into my bones. Who else sleeps in your bedroom? No, Owen said immediately, shaking his head, backing away from me as if I had just struck him. No, Clara, don't do that. Don't say that. Isabella wouldn't do this. I know she can be materialistic, but she is not a thief. She knows how much that necklace meant to Mom. She knows it's your most prized possession. She wouldn't commit a felony. She was screaming at you last week because she needed $140,000 for a Range Rover. I shouted, the fury igniting like gasoline in my veins. You cut off her credit cards! And now, magically, a $90,000 antique emerald vanishes from a locked safe that only she had the physical proximity to access? It could have been the cleaning service, Owen yelled back, desperate to protect his fragile, crumbling marriage. We had an HVAC guy in here 2 weeks ago fixing the vents. Maybe he saw me open it. HVAC guys don't pick 12-digit combination locks and leave $10,000 in cash sitting untouched to steal a highly identifiable, vintage piece of jewelry. I snapped, tears of pure rage spilling down my cheeks. It was a targeted theft, Owen. She took it. We fought for nearly 2 hours. Owen was fiercely, desperately clinging to his denial. He couldn't face the reality that the woman he married was a sociopath capable of stealing a dead woman's legacy to fund a status symbol. He begged me not to call the police, promising he would hire a private investigator, promising he would tear the house apart to find it. I am calling the police, Owen, I told him, picking up my purse. If she didn't do it, she has nothing to worry about. But I am not letting my mother's memory disappear because you are too afraid of your wife. I drove straight to the local police precinct. I sat in a sterile, fluorescent-lit interview room across from Detective Vance, a seasoned investigator with the Property Crimes Division. I handed him the original appraisal documents, high-resolution photographs of the Midnight Emerald, and the specific serial numbers laser-etched into the platinum setting. This is a museum-quality piece, Miss Rostova, Detective Vance noted, whistling softly as he looked at the photographs. This isn't something a junkie takes to a local pawn shop for $500. A piece this specific, with this level of provenance, has to go through a highly specialized luxury broker or a private auction house to be fenced. If it hits the open market, it will trigger massive red flags. I know who took it, Detective, I said, my voice cold and steady. It was my sister-in-law, Isabella. I explained the living situation, the screaming match over the luxury car, the cut-off credit cards, and the existence of the master override key in her bedroom. Detective Vance took diligent notes, but he offered me a sympathetic, frustratingly professional look. Miss Rostova, I understand your suspicions, and they are incredibly logical. But without physical evidence, security footage, a confession, or the item in her possession, it's entirely circumstantial. We cannot arrest a woman simply because she wanted a car and had proximity to a safe. We need hard, undeniable proof. So what do? I asked, my heart sinking. We wait, Detective Vance said, tapping his pen against the file. I am entering the serial numbers and photographs into the National Stolen Gem Registry. I am flagging the piece with every major auction house and luxury broker on the East Coast. If she tries to liquidate it, the buyer will run a metallurgical authentication. When they do, The system will alert us immediately. Until then, you act completely normal. Do not tip her off. Act normal. It was the hardest thing I had ever done in my entire life. For the next 5 days, I lived in a state of suffocating, agonizing suspense. Every time my phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat, hoping it was the detective. I ignored Isabella's fake, overly sympathetic texts, asking how I was handling the burglary. And then, on Saturday afternoon, the evidence drove itself directly into my brother's driveway. Owen had practically begged me to come over for a late lunch, claiming that Isabella wanted to comfort me and that maintaining family unity was crucial while the private investigator worked the case. I agreed, solely because I needed to see her face. I needed to see if the guilt was eating at her. When my Uber pulled through the wrought iron gates of their estate, I didn't see guilt. I saw a brand new, customized, fully loaded 2024 Range Rover autobiography. It was parked in the center of the circular driveway, gleaming like a massive, metallic monument to pure evil. It was painted a pristine, glittering Santorini black, with a custom ivory leather interior and massive 22-inch alloy wheels. It was a vehicle that retailed for well over $130,000. I stood in the driveway, staring at the luxury tank, feeling a blinding, deafening roar of blood rushing in my ears. The heavy front door of the estate opened. Isabella walked out onto the porch. She was wearing designer sunglasses, holding a crystal flute of mimosas, and projecting an aura of blinding, unadulterated arrogance. "Clara!" Isabella called out, waving her free hand, acting as if the most sacred piece of my family history hadn't vanished from her home just days prior. "Do you absolutely love it?" "I literally just drove it off the lot 2 hours ago." I walked up the stone steps, my hands clenched so tightly in my pockets that my fingernails were drawing blood from my palms. "It's beautiful, Isabella," I said, my voice dangerously flat, entirely devoid of emotion. "How did you afford it?" Owen told me last week he cut off the platinum cards. Isabella's flawless smile didn't waver for a microscopic fraction of a second. She took a delicate sip of her mimosa. "Oh, you know how dramatic Owen gets about finances. He stresses over absolutely nothing." Isabella laughed, a high, thin, sickening sound. "I actually landed a massive, exclusive brand ambassadorship with a high-end wellness company. They gave me an incredible signing bonus. I decided to treat myself. I deserve it, after all the stress we've been under with the whole break-in situation." She looked at me, lowering her sunglasses, her eyes completely devoid of sympathy. "I am so sorry about your mother's little necklace, by the way," Isabella continued, her voice dripping in that manufactured, influencer sympathy tone. "It's such a tragedy. But honestly, Clara, you should have kept it in a bank vault. Keeping something that expensive in a residential house is just asking for trouble. You were a little irresponsible, don't you think? The sheer, breathtaking sociopathy required to steal my dead mother's necklace, use the money to buy a luxury SUV, and then gaslight me into believing the theft was my own fault because I was irresponsible was a level of evil I had never ever encountered before. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge at her, even though every single nerve ending in my body demanded I wrap my hands around her throat and choke the truth out of her. "A brand partnership," I repeated softly. "That's incredible, Isabella. Which company?" Isabella blinked, a tiny, fleeting flicker of panic crossing her perfectly contoured face. "Oh, I can't say yet. Ironclad non-disclosure agreements. You understand how corporate PR works. The campaign launches next month." "Right, of course," I said. Owen walked out onto the porch. He looked completely defeated. He stared at the Range Rover, then at me, looking physically ill. "She signed the lease papers yesterday," Owen muttered, refusing to meet my eyes, clearly trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince me. "She said the brand deal covers the monthly payments entirely." "It's a purchase, darling, not a lease," Isabella corrected him sharply, shooting him a look of mild irritation. "I put a massive cash down payment on it. It's an asset." I stared at her. A massive cash down payment on a $130,000 vehicle, made exactly 5 days, after an antique emerald vanished into thin air. I excused myself from the lunch within 20 minutes, claiming a sudden, severe migraine. I didn't go home. I took an Uber directly to the police precinct. Detective Vance was sitting at his desk, surrounded by files, when I barged into the Property Crimes Division. "Miss Rostova," the detective said, looking up in surprise, immediately putting down his pen. "I was actually just dialing your number. We got a hit on the International Gem Registry." I froze, the air leaving my lungs in a violent rush. "You found it?" A highly specialized, private luxury estate broker operating out of Manhattan flagged the serial numbers this morning, Detective Vance explained, pulling a thick file from his desk. An anonymous seller approached them 4 days ago to liquidate the piece. The broker required a metallurgical authentication before finalizing the wire transfer to the seller. When the laboratory ran the laser etchings on the platinum clasp through the database, our red flag popped up. "Is the necklace safe?" I whispered, tears of profound relief flooding my eyes. "It has been secured by the NYPD and is currently locked in an evidence vault awaiting secure transport back to our jurisdiction," the detective confirmed with a reassuring nod. "The broker is fully cooperating with our investigation. They have provided us with all the contact information and financial routing details of the individual who sold them the stolen property." Detective Vance looked at me, his expression turning incredibly grim. "Miss Rostova," the detective said slowly, "before I show you these documents, I need you to prepare yourself. The person who liquidated your mother's necklace did not use an alias. They used a Shell LLC to receive the funds, but the primary beneficiary account is registered under a name you are going to recognize." I stood there, feeling the cold, hard certainty of justice finally solidifying in my chest like a block of ice. "It's Isabella," I said, my voice completely steady. "My sister-in-law." Detective Vance raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my absolute lack of shock. He opened the folder and slid a printed, heavily highlighted banking ledger across his desk. "The broker finalized the preliminary payout of $82,000 to an account registered to Bellavite Lifestyle LLC exactly 3 days ago," the detective confirmed. "We pulled the subsequent transaction history from that account this morning with an emergency subpoena." I looked at the ledger. Right below the massive $82,000 incoming wire transfer from the Manhattan jewelry broker, there was an outgoing transaction executed just 24 hours later. It was a wire transfer for $75,000. The recipient was listed as Prestige Auto Group, Land Rover dealership. I stared at the numbers, the timestamps, the undeniable, hard-coded digital proof of her absolute, psychopathic betrayal. "She bought a car," I whispered, tracing the ink on the page with a trembling finger. "She sold my mother's soul so she could look good at a country club. We have the definitive proof of grand larceny, wire fraud, and the interstate trafficking of stolen goods," Detective Vance said, closing the folder with a definitive, authoritative snap. "We are preparing the arrest warrants now. Do you know where your sister-in-law is currently located?" I looked up at the detective. A slow, dark, terribly cold smile spread across my face. "She is at her house," I said, taking pictures of her new car. "Detective, when you go to arrest her, can I ride in the front seat?" The interior of Detective Vance's unmarked police cruiser smelled faintly of stale coffee and leather. As we drove through the winding, tree-lined streets of my brother's affluent suburban neighborhood, my heart pounded a relentless, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Yet, despite the adrenaline flooding my system, my mind was entirely, terrifyingly clear. For the past week, I had been drowning in a suffocating ocean of grief, convinced that the very last physical trace of my mother was gone forever. Now, armed with undeniable, hard-coded banking ledgers, I wasn't just a grieving daughter anymore. I was an executioner, and I was about to drop the axe. "Miss Rostova," Detective Vance said, his eyes fixed on the road as he navigated the cruiser toward Owen's estate. "I need you to let me and my partner handle the initial contact. Grand larceny suspects, particularly those whose entire self-worth is tied to public perception, can become highly volatile when cornered with irrefutable evidence. She will likely attempt to gaslight you or manipulate her husband. Do not engage until she is fully secured." "Understood, detective," I replied, my voice steady. The time for arguing with Isabella was over. There was nothing left to say that a pair of steel handcuffs couldn't articulate better. A marked police cruiser, its light bar currently dark to avoid drawing premature attention, was trailing discreetly a block behind us. As we pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of Owen's property, the scene playing out in the circular driveway was almost sickeningly perfect. Isabella was still outside. She had changed out of her brunch attire and was now wearing a high-end, designer athletic set. She had mounted a ring light and a tripod on the manicured lawn and was actively filming a TikTok video in front of her pristine, glittering black Range Rover autobiography. She was dramatically tossing her hair, tracing the hood of the vehicle, and speaking into a lavalier microphone about manifesting your dreams and hustling for luxury. Owen was sitting on the stone steps of the porch. He held a glass of scotch in his hand, his shoulders slumped, looking like a man who had completely surrendered to a life of quiet, expensive misery. When the unmarked sedan pulled into the driveway, cutting off Isabella's camera angle, she stopped mid-sentence. She let out a loud, exaggerated groan of pure annoyance. She clearly assumed we were a confused delivery driver or perhaps a neighbor complaining about the property line. Then, the marked police cruiser pulled in directly behind us, effectively boxing the Range Rover into the driveway. Isabella's annoyed scowl faltered. She pulled the tiny microphone off her collar. Owen immediately stood up, setting his scotch down on the stone railing, his face paling as he recognized my figure stepping out of the passenger side of the unmarked car. "Clara?" Owen called out, hurrying down the porch steps. "Detective Vance? What's going on? Did you find the people who broke into the safe?" Isabella, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, quickly plastered on her most convincing mask of empathetic concern. She practically glided across the driveway, placing a possessive, manicured hand on Owen's arm. "Oh my gosh, Detective!" Isabella gasped, her eyes wide, playing the role of the terrified, supportive wife to absolute perfection. "Please, tell me you found it. We have been just sick with worry over Clara's little necklace. Was it a cleaning crew?" I told Owen we need to do better background checks on the staff. I didn't say a word. I just stood next to Detective Vance and stared at her. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her performance was mesmerizing. If I hadn't spent the last hour reviewing the wire transfers, I might have actually believed the genuine concern etched into her flawless features. Detective Vance did not smile. He did not offer any comforting platitudes. He pulled a thick manila folder from inside his jacket. "The Midnight Emerald was not stolen by a cleaning crew, Mrs. Rostova," Detective Vance stated, his voice a flat, uncompromising baritone that demanded absolute silence. "It was recovered this morning in Manhattan. It was intercepted at a highly specialized, private luxury estate brokerage." Owen let out a massive, shuddering sigh of relief, running a hand through his hair. "Manhattan? Thank God. Thank you, Detective. Do you have the burglar in custody?" "The broker is fully cooperating with the NYPD," Detective Vance continued, his eyes locking onto Isabella like a sniper acquiring a target. "They require strict metallurgical and laser etch authentication for antique pieces of that caliber before finalizing payouts. When they ran the platinum filigree through the International Gem Database, it immediately flagged our stolen property report. The broker froze the transaction and handed over the full identity, address, and financial routing details of the seller." I watched Isabella. I watched the microscopic, involuntary twitch of her jaw. I watched the blood slowly, inevitably begin to drain from her perfectly contoured cheeks. Her hand, still resting on Owen's arm, tightened into a claw. "Well," Isabella laughed, a high, thin, incredibly brittle sound. "That is just amazing. I hope you lock whoever it is away forever. Stealing a dead woman's jewelry is just sick." "I entirely agree, Mrs. Rostova," Detective Vance said smoothly. "Which brings us to the seller's identity." The detective opened the manila folder. He let the suspense hang in the crisp afternoon air, tightening the invisible noose around her neck. "The seller did not use a fake ID or an alias," Vance explained. "They utilized a corporate shell LLC to process the payout, assuming it would mask the direct deposit. The preliminary wire transfer from the Manhattan broker was $82,000. That money was deposited exactly 3 days ago." Owen frowned, his sharp legal mind instantly catching the discrepancy in the timeline. "Wait, 3 days ago? But I only discovered the safe was empty last week. Who could have bypassed my security, fenced a $90,000 antique, and secured an offshore wire transfer that fast?" Someone who had prearranged the sale with the broker before the item was ever removed from the safe, I said softly, breaking my silence. Owen looked at me, utterly confused by the chilling calmness in my voice. Clara, what do you mean? Detective Vance pulled a single piece of paper from the folder. It was the printed banking ledger, heavily highlighted with bright yellow marker. The corporate shell LLC that received the $82,000 payout for your mother's stolen emerald, Mr. Rostova, Detective Vance read clearly, holding the paper up, is registered under the name Bellavite Lifestyle LLC. The silence that descended upon the driveway was absolute. It was a suffocating, ringing vacuum. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing through the oak trees. Owen froze. His entire body turned to stone. He looked at the detective, then at the banking ledger, and finally, slowly, he turned his head to look at his wife. What? Owen whispered, the word barely escaping his lips. That's impossible. Detective, there must be a clerical error. Bellavite is Isabella's social media company. That's her LLC. There is a mistake. There is no mistake, Mr. Rostova, the detective countered effortlessly. We executed an emergency subpoena on the account this morning. The routing numbers, the social security number attached to the LLC, and the IP address used to authorize the transfer match your wife perfectly. This is insane! Isabella suddenly shrieked, her voice pitching up into an aggressive, theatrical wail of outrage. She took a step back, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. She is trying to frame me. Clara has always hated me. She probably sold it herself to a black market dealer and routed the money to my business account to destroy my marriage. She is a psycho. It was the most pathetic, desperate, cornered animal lie she could have possibly fabricated. Mrs. Rostova, Detective Vance said, his voice dropping into an icy, lethal register. Do not insult my intelligence. Because we didn't just track the incoming wire transfer from the stolen jewelry broker, we tracked exactly where the money went next. The detective pulled a second piece of paper from the folder. He held it up so Isabella could see the undeniable, hard-coded digital proof of her absolute, psychopathic betrayal. Exactly 24 hours after the $82,000 payout hit your LLC account, Vance announced to the entire driveway, a secondary wire transfer was executed from that same account for exactly $75,000. The recipient of that transfer was Prestige Auto Group, Land Rover dealership. It was the exact down payment required to secure the lease on the 2024 Range Rover autobiography, currently sitting behind you. Isabella's arrogant, defiant smirk instantly vanished. The fake outrage, the indignant influencer persona, the practiced victimhood, it all evaporated into thin air. She stood there, her mouth slightly open, staring at the highlighted banking ledger in the detective's hand. She was trapped. There was no spinning this. There was no gaslighting her way out of a federal paper trail. Owen stared at his wife. The denial that he had been so desperately, fiercely clinging to for the past week shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The reality of the monster he had married crashed down upon him, crushing the breath out of his lungs. Isabella? Owen whispered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual commanding courtroom authority. Isabella, tell me this is a lie. Look me in the eye and tell me you didn't use my master override key to steal my dead mother's necklace to buy a car. Isabella didn't look at him. She looked at the ground, her chest heaving as her mind raced, desperately searching for a trapdoor in a locked room. It was a misunderstanding, Isabella stammered, the words tumbling out of her mouth in a frantic, pathetic rush. She looked up at Owen, her eyes wide with manufactured panic. Owen, baby, listen to me. Clara said I could have it. She said I could sell it to fund my brand expansion. It was an investment gift. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the lie was almost physically sickening. I have never, ever told you that, I said, my voice ringing with cold, absolute fury. I wouldn't let you touch that emerald if my life depended on it. You're lying! Isabella screamed at me, her face twisting into an ugly, hateful sneer. The mask was completely off now. The rotting, venomous core beneath her flawless makeup was bare for everyone to see. You're just jealous because I'm successful and you're a pathetic, broke therapist. You don't even deserve that emerald. It was just rotting in a box. You wouldn't know what to do with that kind of money. So, you decided to steal it? Owen roared. stepping toward her, his face turning a dangerous, mottled shade of purple. I had never seen my brother this furious. You stole the last thing my mother left my sister? You violated my safe in my home? You lied to my face while I watched my sister hyperventilating on my office floor? You wouldn't buy me the car, Owen! Isabella shrieked right back at him, completely abandoning any pretense of innocence, her narcissism flaring up into a blinding, toxic defense mechanism. I needed that car for my image. You cut off my platinum card. What was I supposed to do? Let some stupid, outdated antique collect dust in a safe while I look like a peasant pulling up to the Oakhaven Club? The silence that followed her outburst was heavy and utterly devastating. She had just confessed, in front of her husband, her sister-in-law, and 2 armed police officers. She didn't feel an ounce of remorse for the profound emotional violence of the theft. She only felt aggrieved that her husband had forced her hand by restricting her shopping budget. Owen looked at the woman he had married. He looked at her designer tracksuit, her perfectly highlighted hair, and the hollow, rotting, sociopathic void beneath it all. "We are done," Owen whispered, his voice shaking with absolute heartbreak and profound disgust. "I am calling the partners at my firm the second they take you away. I will have the divorce papers drafted by midnight. Do not ever, ever speak to me again." "Owen, wait! No!" Isabella cried, her eyes widening as she suddenly realized the sheer magnitude of what she had just destroyed. The golden goose was walking away. "Owen, baby, I'm sorry. I'll give the car back. I'll pay her back. Please don't do this." "Isabella Rostova," Detective Vance interrupted, his voice devoid of any emotion. He stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and the interstate trafficking of stolen goods. You have the right to remain silent." "No! Stop it! Get your hands off me!" Isabella screamed, thrashing wildly as the detective grabbed her wrists and effortlessly spun her around. "I am a public figure! You can't arrest me! Do you know how many followers I have? Owen, make them stop! Call your lawyers!" Owen didn't move. He stood in the driveway, his hands buried in his pockets, watching with dead, empty eyes as the police officer snapped the cold steel cuffs around his wife's wrists. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," the detective continued, matching her hysteria with a calm, lethal professionalism, marching her toward the marked police cruiser. "Clara, you psychotic bitch, I'll sue you," Isabella wailed as they shoved her into the back of the squad car. She fought them the entire way, forcing the second officer to physically push her head down so she wouldn't hit the door frame. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off her hysterical screaming, leaving only the muffled sound of her kicking the plastic partition from the inside. The second officer, who had been standing quietly by the cruiser, walked over to the pristine, glittering black Range Rover autobiography. He pulled a heavy, bright yellow impound sticker from his pocket and slapped it directly onto the driver's side window. "The vehicle was purchased entirely with stolen, illicit funds," the officer explained to Owen. "It's officially state evidence. A flatbed tow truck will be here in 20 minutes to impound it." Owen just nodded numbly, unable to look at the SUV. I stood in the driveway, feeling a massive, crushing adrenaline crash wash over my body. My knees felt weak, and I let out a long, shuddering breath. It was over. The suffocating nightmare of the past 5 days was finally over. Detective Vance walked back over to me, holding a small, padded evidence envelope. "The Manhattan precinct secured the physical pendant, Miss Rostova," the detective said gently, his eyes softening with genuine empathy. "It will be transported back to our evidence lockup by tomorrow morning via secure courier. Once the district attorney processes the serial numbers for the grand jury indictment, the judge will sign a release order. You will have your mother's emerald back by the end of the week." "Thank you, detective," I whispered, tears of profound relief finally spilling down my cheeks. "Thank you for believing me when I sounded crazy." "We don't deal in beliefs, Miss Rostova. We deal in bank statements," the detective smiled warmly. And hers were a spectacular mess. "Have a good afternoon." The police cruisers pulled out of the driveway, the sirens flashing silently, taking my toxic sister-in-law out of our lives forever. The TikTok photographer, realizing he was definitely not getting paid for the gig, quietly packed his tripod into his hatchback and sped away without saying a word. I was left standing in the driveway with my brother. Owen looked utterly, fundamentally broken. He stared at the impounded Range Rover, the physical manifestation of his ruined marriage. Then he turned to me. "Clara," Owen choked out, tears streaming down his face. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a fierce, desperate, crushing hug. "I am so, so sorry. I should have believed you immediately. I should have protected it better. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know who she really was." I hugged him back, holding my older brother as he wept into my shoulder. "It's not your fault, Owen. You didn't steal it. She manipulated both of us. But it's over now. She can't hurt us anymore." "I'm drafting the divorce papers tonight," Owen promised, pulling back and wiping his eyes, a familiar, protective legal fire returning to his gaze. "I'm changing the locks and throwing her designer garbage onto the lawn. She is never stepping foot in this house again." The aftermath of a family imploding is never entirely clean, but justice has a remarkable way of sanitizing the wound. The criminal case against Isabella was brutally swift. Faced with the undeniable banking ledgers, the subpoenaed IP addresses, the emails with the Manhattan broker, and her own hysterical, witnessed confession in the driveway, her high-priced defense attorney, whom she had hired using the remaining funds in her LLC, advised her to take a plea deal. Isabella pleaded guilty to felony grand larceny and wire fraud. Because the value of the stolen item was nearly $90,000, she crossed the threshold into a severe felony bracket. The judge, utterly disgusted by her lack of remorse and her attempt to gaslight her victim, sentenced her to 3.5 years in a state penitentiary, followed by 4 years of heavily supervised probation. Her precious lifestyle influencer career evaporated overnight. When the local news picked up the story of a prominent socialite stealing her dead mother-in-law's heirloom to buy a Range Rover, her brand sponsors dropped her immediately. Her Instagram comments were flooded with outrage and mockery. She went from posting luxury vacation photos and country club selfies to wearing a state-issued orange jumpsuit. Owen's divorce was finalized 6 months later. Because Isabella had committed a severe felony against his immediate family and utilized his home to commit the crime, the judge nullified any claim she had to spousal support or the house. She walked away with absolutely nothing. As for me, a week after the dramatic arrest in the driveway, Detective Vance called me down to the precinct. I walked into the evidence room, my heart pounding a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. The detective handed me the familiar velvet-lined mahogany box. My hands shook as I unlatched the small brass lock. There it was, the midnight emerald. The flawless, deep green Colombian stone rested beautifully against the velvet, surrounded by the halo of vintage rose-cut diamonds. It caught the harsh fluorescent light of the police station and sparked with an intense, fiery brilliance. I traced the cool, smooth surface of the emerald with my index finger, exactly as I had done when I was a little girl sitting on my mother's lap. A profound, overwhelming sense of peace washed over me. The connection wasn't broken. The physical manifestation of my mother's love had survived the darkness, survived the greed, and found its way back to me. I didn't put the necklace back in the box. I unclasped the delicate platinum filigree chain. With trembling hands, I brought the pendant up to my throat, fastening the clasp behind my neck. The heavy, cool weight of the emerald settled perfectly against my collarbone. I walked out of the police station and stepped into the bright, crisp afternoon sunlight. I caught my reflection in the glass doors of the precinct. The emerald sparkled, a brilliant, defiant flash of green light against the chaos of the world. Isabella had thought she could steal my history to fund her vanity. She had looked at a priceless family heirloom and seen nothing but a down payment on an SUV to impress people she didn't even like. But she had profoundly underestimated the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter, and the relentless, undeniable power of the truth. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address to my newly renovated, fully restored apartment. I sat in the back seat, my hand resting gently over the emerald at my throat. I felt safe. I felt protected. And for the first time since my mother passed away, I felt truly, completely at peace.